What is different about your product?
You got a story to tell, something gonna connect to somebody else.
How to actually run a business versus having a vision for a business.
A lot of people come to me and they say they're scared to take that next leap.
Visual design is always going to be driven by the vision.
And I just was like, how do I do this?
What am I adding that they don't have?
Hey, brand builders, ready to take your brand to the next level? I'm Dana Ammons, and welcome to the Brand Blueprint. Welcome back to the Brand Blueprint, where we dive into the journeys of trailblazing entrepreneurs and brand builders with a focus on founders and executives navigating the brand creation landscape. Today, I'm thrilled to welcome Phil Irvine, a powerhouse in marketing and brand development, who has co-founded brands with a unique twist in the spirits and premium non-alcoholic sectors, including Moon and Bare, both pioneering non-alcoholic brands that he will share more with us today. Now, Phil's background is very impressive and spans several industries. And so I want him to talk about his approach to brand management that actually combines innovation, profitability, and a deep understanding of an audience dynamics. Now, in today's episode, we'll explore Phil's strategies for managing an effective e-commerce P&L, his insights on brand identity, and his take on positioning a product to capture its target market. Phil, it's a pleasure to have you here today. Welcome to the Brand Blueprint.
Oh, thank you so much, Dana. And really excited about joining the show here today. And I know we got a lot to dive into, but yeah, really appreciate the opportunity.
No, I appreciate you agreeing to come on. I know we are on each sides of the coast. I'm on the East Coast, you're on the West Coast. So we got a 3-hour spread between us, at least for a couple of days. I think we're coming up on daylight saving time pretty soon. So it'll be 2 hours here in a couple of weeks in terms of the difference versus 3. But that being said, this is actually a great time to segue into our beginning segment, which is our rapid fire question segment. And this is really just a segment meant to get to know you better, give our audience a little bit of insight on some of the things just outside of your professional experience, which is going to be the majority of our conversation today. So are you ready to get started and jump into our rapid fire question segment?
Oh, definitely. And I hope you asked me about the Los Angeles Dodgers who just won the
That's actually a great question. You know what? As a LA resident, I have a sister who lives in Los Angeles. Shout out to my sister, Cherie Sanders, and a lot of family and friends. And I love to tease them about their fair weatherness when it comes to their sports fandom. So, Phil, you got to represent for the real LA fans out there. So starting with your Dodgers, give me a little bit of favorite sports teams as an LA fan or LA transplant.
Yeah, and I might fall into that bucket of being fair weather fans. So for as far as the background about myself, I actually primarily grew up in Chicago. So, I got to also represent my Chicago Bears, Chicago Cubs. I actually went to school with some of the Chicago Bulls players when they were winning championships in the 90s. So those are my teams, but I was always a strange kid. I actually rooted for a lot of LA teams when I was, in the 80s and 90s. Fernando Valenzuela recently passed away. For any baseball fans out there, they'll remember Fernando Mania and all that. So ironically, I'm a Chicago kid, but I was really into the Dodgers in the 80s, the Lakers in the 80s, and I even liked the Oakland A's and San Francisco Giants back in the day. So I guess you could say I'm a little bit fair weather for sure.
No, hey, look, I'm a lot fair weather. I own it. People who know me know I own it. I'm from Omaha, Nebraska. And like you, I grew up in the 80s and 90s when winning was everything, right? So I always ascribe my fair weatherness to the fact that I like winners, right? And so similar to you, there are a lot of California teams during that era that had my eye because they had a lot of the best players. Their style was like super dope, right? Bo Jackson was running up walls and catching balls, and like it was a good time to be a baseball fan as a young black kid growing up in the Midwest. And unfortunately, the teams that were available to us, hint the Cubs, hint the Royals, hint the Twins, might not have necessarily, for you young folks, if y'all want to go back and check out those records in the 80s and 90s. I know both of those teams I just name dropped have been in the playoffs on a pretty consistent clip over the last couple of years. But when we were growing up, not so much. So I love that insight into one LA's fans fandom, and congratulations on the Dodgers. Really, just taking them to the woodshed of the Yankees over this 4-game series. I was even surprised the Yankees were able to stretch it, given the way that the Dodgers have been playing.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And it's funny because I went to college at the University of Notre Dame, which is primarily known for football, but I played baseball for a year.
Nice.
I grew up loving baseball, played baseball in college, but I'll admit the last 10, 12 years, I really haven't been into baseball, for a variety of reasons. We get older, we have life, we get married, we have other commitments, but this year was one of the first years in a while where, I watched every World Series game, every divisional series game. Something about this season kind of drew me back into the sport. And so
that's dope.
I was excited about it for sure.
Yeah. I mean, look, I have never been a devout baseball fan. I played it as a kid, probably all the way up until 7th or 8th grade. Then I realized I actually didn't have 20/20 vision, and I kind of could explain at that point why I was a habitual strikeout victim. But by that time, I had soured on the sport. So when I did get glasses, I didn't want to play anymore, even though I could finally see. So baseball was always a sport to me to follow from a fandom standpoint, just because I had so many friends and family that played it. And I just always admired the athleticism, what it took to play. So I totally admire the fact that you even at, that level were able to play a year at Notre Dame. That's super impressive. Not everybody gets a chance to play post high school, and definitely not at that level. So super cool. We have to talk about that experience on another interview. So as we go through, let's talk a little bit about kind of your day to day. In the rapid fire section, one of our most popular questions is coffee or tea?
I am a tea guy. I am drinking some green tea right here myself. For some reason, coffee just doesn't sit well with my stomach.
Green tea guy. I gotta fist bump you on that. That is definitely my play too, and for the same reasons. I think many people who know me from the 90s and 2000s in my corporate career are probably watching this going, what the heck, Dana, what happened to you? Because I drank a lot of coffee early in my career. But I actually ascribe it to being a young Black kid coming out of the hood, not really knowing much about the coffee culture. And then the minute you hit corporate, it's outside of every meeting room, at every break. All of your corporate counterparts, especially in the 90s and 2000s, wanted to roll to Starbucks every break. So I just went with the flow. And then I got to a point where at some point I realized coffee actually wasn't really good for my stomach. And so most days that I drank a lot of it, I didn't really feel well. I was wired, didn't feel well, right? So green tea, I think I discovered it, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago. I'd heard people kind of like raving about it, and I was like, My grandmother was a tea fan, and that was about the only time I really drank tea is when I went and hung out with her. And then my first green tea or two, man, I was like, changed my life. Like back to the high of coffee without the stomach issues.
Yeah. I mean, same thing for myself. And, I like to think I'm semi, conscious of my diet and regimented with my eating and food patterns. And yeah, just tea gives me the right spike, especially in the morning. I work out first thing in the morning almost every day, and, it gets me going, it gets my adrenaline going, but the tea helps me give me that extra boost to also have mental focus as well too. So I'm never turning back to coffee. I never was a coffee person also. So yeah.
No, I love that. Now, look, you just segued into another question we usually ask, and you kind of partially ask, which is, are you a morning person or a night owl? Sounds like you might be a morning person, but you tell us.
Yeah. I think my father was a morning person. And so growing up around him, he was also an entrepreneur when I was a kid as well. I think that coupled with, playing sports, you constantly have morning practices. And then, so I grew up playing sports, played pickup basketball till I was maybe 31, 32. And I got into endurance sports. So now I mostly just do kind of half marathons and sometimes marathons, but I used to also do triathlons. And for any of those that participate in those sports, like they typically start at between 6 and 7:30 a.m. Yeah. So you're naturally just training and getting your workouts in early, and it's just kind of stuck with me. I like to get the workout out of the way first thing. I'm wired at like 7 a.m. and I'm within my current day to day, I'm answering emails, I'm on Slack, and I think on the flip side though, these days I'm probably in bed by 9:30 p.m. So I can't really last and hang the way that I used to back in my my college days. So
no, I will agree. And I'm the opposite. I'm a night owl who has to operate early mornings. So it obviously makes for even less time to actually sleep. And as I get older, I'm really starting to understand the value of sleep and the lack of the damage that lack of sleep can actually inflict on the human body, right? Like an interesting fact, I think several years ago, I read an article that sleep deprivation was named by the World Health Organization as a carcinogen, similar to smoking a pack of cigarettes. So shift workers suffer from their bodies suffer from the same effects that they would equivocate to smoking a pack of cigarettes is working a night shift. Right. And I have an aunt who raised me, my Aunt Minnie, shout out to her. She's no longer here, but she worked 25 years on the graveyard shift, as they say, the 6 to 6. And she passed away in her late 50s. Right. And not to say that the director described, but she wasn't a smoker. She wasn't a heavy drinker. She was relatively in shape. Right. But lack of sleep is a real thing. So I definitely think a lot of us can learn from that lesson. And I think, going into our conversation about founders and brand owners, et cetera, that is frankly sometimes the hours you have to keep regardless of whether you want to or not. So really cool to hear that. Now, one of the last questions in this section I'd like to ask you before we jump to the next one, and I'm interested to see what you would say on this front. So you are a guy who has brands in the culinary space, both beverage, and then we'll talk about a technology brand that you also are part of later in another segment. But I want to know, what's the most memorable meal you've ever had? As a culinary guy who's I'm sure tried a lot of great meals and a lot of great restaurants, tell me about a recent great meal you had.
Yeah. Okay. If you want to go recent, so to me, I am a quote unquote foodie, but to me, it's also, it's that coupled with the experience that you have as well too. And I'm a big believer in the service can elevate the experience that you have with food. Yeah, I gotta say, even though I'm trying to lay off red meat, I'm a steak guy.
Yes, I am.
And so I wish I had a funnier or more out of the box answer, but Mastro's is a go-to steak spot here in LA. They have one in Malibu, they have a couple in Beverly Hills, and just every time you go in there, from the time you step in, you feel like you're around excellence. Out here in LA, not to be too cliche, but you feel like you're around studio execs. Maybe there's agents, athletes, and
not that you feel like that, you actually are. I mean, in LA, you actually are. At Mastro's, you were probably sitting 10 feet away from Al Pacino's next movie, right? 4 feet behind you is Jamie Foxx's agent, probably calling it a deal. That's the world we live in. And I think for the audience to understand, because it may sound like flossing or fronting or humble bragging, but it's not, in the sense that I have a lot of experience with the same chain, not because I had the money across the entirety of my life to afford to live there on a regular basis, but because it was also part of the business language. And I did a lot of entertaining there with multiple brands that I worked for, including Colgate and Pepsi and P&G. And I found Mastro's to be, if not one of the best steakhouse franchises or brands, as they were on the national scene. I mean, it's pretty, I think, top to bottom, 100% grade A, as Phil just named. So great example. One quick question as a follow-up to that: what's your steak cut?
Usually New York strip is usually my New York strip or ribeye, and then you got to go medium rare. We have
Agree.
A lot of my friends, but you got to have a little bit of rare.
Hey, let me tell you, you cannot come to my house on a summer grill out and I'm having steaks and be one of those well done people. So newsflash for people watching this, you can hold me to it. If I invite you to something that I am grilling the meat at, I do not do well done, because it is a waste of my money and I bought the meat. Now, if you want to bring your own meat and let me fry it to the point or cook it to the point where it tastes like shoe leather, I have no problem. I can do that with the best of them. But ultimately, I would prefer to treat it with the respect that it deserves and go medium to medium well at the very worst. So I so agree with you. And I think that might be our Midwest roots too, right? Like, it's hard to grow up in Chicago, Omaha, Nebraska, or any of those marketplaces where many of our family members, for me, my grandfather actually worked in a slaughterhouse along with his 7 brothers and sisters over the course of 25, 30 years. So when I grew up, there was always a butcher wrap piece of meat in the freezer of some sort, right? But you learn to respect meat early on, especially when you're poor. So no, I so appreciate getting to know you on a personal level. So let's just jump into the interview. I will have a limited time with you for this first segment. I want a lot of questions to ask, a little bit of time to cover. So let's start with our core section of our interview. Are you ready?
Yep. Yeah. Ready to go. Yep.
All right, let's get started. So, Phil, there are a lot of founders who watch the show and who come to us from all different types of backgrounds. And I think sometimes we underestimate the power of one's background and how it can inform your ability to then find the right connectivity and fit with a brand in the future or a operation or startup in the future that you want to support. So you've got a fascinating background, and I know we can go, all sorts of ways. We've already started with some of the more interesting points of you playing baseball, and being a kid from Chicago that had a lot of love for the West Coast, which you now live in. Tell us a little bit about your fascinating journey across, the facets of brand marketing, and share a little bit about your background and what led you to the brands that you're with now, Moon and Bear.
Yeah. So, I actually started out in the technology space, and not to age myself, but this was right around the .com era. So every kid coming out of college was just trying to get to some type of .com or some type of company that had a website presence, because that's where the jobs were at the time. And I, I'm glad I did go that path, because I lived in San Jose and Silicon Valley. So I got direct exposure to a lot of innovative tech companies like eBay, PayPal, Google was there, so that was great. But I made a decision to go to grad school, business school, after 5 years, because I felt like in technology, at least in the arena that I was in, you were incentivized to see things black and white, be efficient. I was a project manager, so it was mostly about organization, which is definitely important. But my passion is around, how can you create experiences for consumers and use data and analytics to inform how you engage with them. And when I say engage, that can be advertising, that could be how you think about designing your product, your website, your Salesforce interactions, your customer service interactions. So, I spent 5 years in tech, got my MBA, and I've had various roles on working for brands and then working for agencies, but they've all had a theme around, how can we drive more direct to consumer and omni-channel growth for brands, leveraging data, technology, tools, merge with creative input, and thinking about how to message and engage with consumers. And just to round it out, I've had experiences in healthcare, fitness with Beachbody. But then over the last 10 years, I've had a little bit more of a focus on e-commerce. I worked at a flower company called the Books Company. I worked at a private equity firm and worked in beauty, home goods, and then, now have a focus in the CPG and beverage space. So, there's a lot to unpack with all that, but that's the essence of kind of how I got to where I'm at right now.
No, I mean, look, a lot to unpack, but then a lot of lessons learned, I'm sure. I mean, you were exposed to a lot of different operations, a bunch of different approaches to call it get the bag, right? A lot of different concepts and ideas from an innovation standpoint. And we're going to get to some of these other learnings, but just out of curiosity, as you continue to move from one operation and one opportunity to the next, what kind of informed your decision making in making those moves, right? Like I have, similar to you, I've moved geographically quite a bit, 13 times, 25 years. I've moved in terms of companies. People have asked me before, like, man, you worked for SC Johnson for like 5-6 years. You worked for Colgate for like all these great companies. Why didn't you stay longer, right? And for me, it was the pursuit of a new opportunity, a new challenge, something that I thought could, further not just myself, but also allow me to reach more people and allow me to affect more from my little bitty, place in the world. And so that was my reason and my motivation for doing it. But talk a little bit about how you made those decisions and what motivated you to keep moving.
Yeah, definitely. So I think it's a couple of things. When I went to grad school, graduated from grad school, I've always had a vision that I wanted to pursue a path where I could become a general manager of either a business unit, a function, or something of that nature, basically with revenue responsibility coupled with managing a team and resources. I tap a lot into my sports background. I was also a quarterback of my high school football team, and I'm one of these strange people that I love to deal with different personalities and figure out how to motivate them. So I've always wanted to have that coupled with, driving growth and revenue for a business. And
another way of saying you've always been a natural leader. A natural leader. I love it. Like natural leader. And clearly a natural leader with a nice arm. What are you, right arm or left?
Left-handed, actually.
Oh, and lefty. Oh, so just a strong lefty leader. Like that was already your trait, right? Like you had this strong arm and you had this desire to lead people. I love it.
So, I guess it's a positive and negative. When I look back at my career and the various moves that I've made, the reason I made a lot of the moves that I made was a lot of times I plateaued in the current role that I was at. I didn't see a path for progression. And ultimately I was trying to get to this role with full kind of, general management responsibility. Recruiters sometimes give me feedback that I maybe should have been a little more patient with some of the moves that I made and wait for, a lot of them have said I could have gotten to where I am, a long time ago. But in my mind, each incremental move that I made, I added another tool to my tool belt. I started out in customer retention marketing, which is a lot of email, SMS. So I got to know those channels. I went on the agency side because I wanted to get more exposure to, upper funnel advertising, how to think about doing like television advertising, which I never got experience with working at smaller brands. And then I went back to a private equity company working with smaller brands, but that was my first taste of having kind of full GM responsibilities. So, I kind of couple it as if the learning stops and progression stops in your role and you can find incremental growth with a new opportunity. I've always had the mentality, just go for it.
Eloise, can you bring that back one more time? We need to hear that again.
If the learning stops and progression stops in your role and you can find incremental growth with a new opportunity, I've always had the mentality, just go for it. I guess because I've been able to always typically land in a good next step. I have the risk tolerance to jump to new opportunities. So that, that's the biggest driver of why I've made the moves that I've made. So.
No, I love that explanation. And I think it's inspirational for those that are listening that hear that same advice sometimes from whether it's a recruiter or frankly, family members, your wife, husband, significant others, like, yo, what do you continue to move for? Like, stay at this place, right? Or why did you not stay at this spot? And I think there's two ways of looking at it. And I like to tell people all the time, because I similarly chose to take moves versus strictly go straight to the top. And I like to describe it in the analogy of climbing a mountain. Some of us, when climbing a mountain, like to stop along the way and smell the flowers, like to go wander off the side trail and go maybe fish in a little pond off to the side. Some of us may stay at a little cabin or inn halfway up and find that the company is really cool and stay there for a while, right? And enjoy our way, knowing that we're still objectively trying to get to the top of the mountain and we're relatively still, parallel or close to the path, not necessarily on it. But there are others of us who say, you know what, my overall objective and the satisfaction for me is actually reaching the pinnacle as fast as I can get there. And I respect that, right? I respect those who say, I don't want to get deterred. I want to go straight to the top. And I'm going to do whatever I got to do to get there. And then I'm going to do what I got to do to stay there. My philosophy is a bit more of taking the switchback route, right? Like I mountain bike and I like the thought process of the direct line straight up a mountain is not always the most efficient. And so for me, I've taken some lefts and some rights, right? But steadily climbed. And I think this is a great kind of segue into the explanation you just gave relative to some of the choices you made. So we're talking about some of your experience specifically with brand positioning, market strategy, and then we'll talk a little bit about the e-commerce expertise. But as you think about some of the brands that you worked for, some of the brands you managed in the VC space, and then now even brands that you've actually, either co-founded or founded yourself, tell me a little bit about the evolution of a brand's position and how, a brand can start in one place and think that this is their consumer and this is their purposes and this is their reason to be and end up in a completely different place, almost like career-wise we talked about, right? Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I have a couple of really good examples of that. I think it happens a lot so a lot of my experience is with, direct to consumer brands that like to consider themselves like lifestyle brands in whatever category that they play in.
Yep.
And a lot of times they choose a lane in the category, whether it's being the premium player in the space, whether it's having a focus on experience, whether it's focusing on pricing, or potentially a combination of all of those factors. And so one, I'll give you a good example. The Boots company is a flower delivery company. They actually were on Shark Tank about 10 years ago or so. The founder and CEO, John Tavis, great guy. I've known him for like 10, 12 years. He brought me in to run CRM. Two of their key brand pillars were transparency with the farmers where they source flowers from. So they developed this connection where they made the consumers feel like they were helping these farmers directly, because they were selective about partnering with farmers that had sustainable practices and whatnot. So that was part of it. And then the other thing was transparent pricing. So for anybody that shops flowers, typically Valentine's Day or Mother's Day, you'll typically see, you'll see one price when you first get to a website, but then you end up paying 30 to 40% more because of service fees, delivery, and other random charges that they'll throw on. Yep. So the Books was unique in that, the starting price for the cheapest flowers was $40, and then you checked out with $40. I think with those key pillars, the company had aspirations to grow from, they were at about 30 million when I was there, but they wanted to get to 100 million. And I think those pillars worked for that target audience set to get to 30 million, but to expand to 100 million, they had to think about things like potentially charging for shipping. That was the big lever that we actually evolved into when I was at the brand. But then outside of that too, they did get into a little bit of discounting, whereas in the past they didn't.
They hadn't done it.
But they were, the Books were strategic about it. Like from a timing perspective, it would only be during certain periods where the volume made up for the discounting and sales. But I think I just bring that example up because a lot of brands, they have a vision, and I think it's great to get to a certain growth trajectory, but if you want to become $100 million, $200 million brand, you got to sometimes think, how do you evolve your positioning to expand to more of the masses, and not to bring too much politics into this. You're seeing this with when people talk about what Harris and Trump are doing, and it's this big emphasis. It's not how do you appeal to your base, but it's how do you appeal to the undecided independent voter.
Correct. Wow. That was a really important point. Can we hear that again?
It's not how do you appeal to your base, but it's how do you appeal to the undecided independent voter.
Correct.
And what are the issues you talk about? Like, what do you lean into? And it's a similar thing for brands on their growth trajectory as well.
I love that. And it's a great analogy, because anybody watching this, whether you sit on one side of the political spectrum or the other, and I don't ascribe to tell you which one to sit on, I only want to see you vote in a couple of days. But the reality is the point is similar with brands. You're not always talking to your evangelists, to the people who love your brand. You're trying to convince that brand considerer, that person that has your brand in consideration of the set of items or SKUs they could choose, and you've got to get them a reason to choose you versus another competitor. And I love that. I just want to tap back on that other example you just gave. Why it's also important to note is because you noted a brand that started off with a competitive strategy that appealed to the consumers in their local market, but it was highly tied to the cost structure of their ability to deliver that promise to their consumers, right? $40 up front, we get it to you for $40. The minute they try to scale, well, we can't do the $40 from LA to Detroit, because in Detroit, it's going to probably be about 65 when it gets there, right? Like, that's just the reality of it. And so now all of a sudden you've tied your brand identity to a cost lever that you could not control. And then as you go to scale, now you got to change the brand, right? Because you can no longer live and breathe with that same consumer and that same community you initially built, because they're looking for 40 to 40. Right.
Yep.
And I love that. That's such a great example. So talk a little bit more, because you've seen this actually happen in a couple of other brands you've worked with, where they start in one area and thinking, man, this is going to be dope, and they end up in a whole different place.
Yeah. Yeah. No. I'm glad you brought up what you just did, because the piece that I didn't mention was the fulfillment piece was the reason why they couldn't stick to that $40, $50.
Yep.
We didn't have distribution centers set up, whereas competitors did. And so, yeah, that was a great call out. I think, so I worked with a beauty brand called Beekman 1802. They, for a quick background, their two founders grew up on a farm with goats.
Yep.
And
I've seen their story before.
Yeah, they actually had I think they had a series on Amazon Prime called the Beekman Boys or something. And
maybe that's where I caught it. Yep.
But it was like the source, and their big hero product initially was bar soap, body beauty products, and also a big part of the growth trajectory was selling through QVC, Home Shopping Network, like direct response TV as a channel. Yeah. But that channel has dried up in a lot of industries, and they wanted to shift toward direct to consumer. But the thing is the growth opportunity in direct to consumer was more younger audiences, younger females in particular, and for some reason or another, bar body soap products just weren't appealing to them. It was more skincare. So skincare for your arms, your legs, your face, and so they, their brand was pillared around, obviously, the goat milk, direct response TV, and bar related products. But from a product perspective, they had to evolve and introduce more skincare products into the mix. But then also that led to just different strategies on how to market, engage to the younger audience. And, there were implications from a website perspective, creative, social media. They got into live selling, which is a really big thing with the younger audience now. Either through TikTok or your website, you have demonstrations. It's kind of the replacement for QVC now, but through like TikTok and stuff. So that was another great example where I got to kind of see that play out in the year that I was working there too.
Look, Phil, you are dropping major science on the show today, because that is a perfect, I think, counter example to the first one you gave. The first one you gave, right? They leveraged it against a cost lever that they couldn't control if they scaled. In this case, it was really the community, right, shifted on them, and the way to reach the community changed, right? And I think continues to change, right? Like, we're talking TikTok, and we're talking TikTok lives now. If we were talking almost a year ago, we were simply talking TikTok reels. If we were 2 years ago, we were talking Insta reels, right? Like, if you keep going back and back and back, the audience continues to move to different forms of and places of where they actually want to receive your information. And as they move rooms, even to your point, the way you have to give them the information changes. Because who would have thought 5 years ago in a just put a post up Facebook world that it would evolve to 5 years later to, hey, if you don't have really short, engaging, cool, quirky content, 15 to 20 seconds or less, you're probably not doing it, right? And a marketer 5 years ago would have got shot for coming up with a 15 to 20 second marketing campaign, right? We would have kicked them out of the room like, bro, are you crazy? You didn't get any of my features and benefits. I didn't really get the long shot of my product. I needed people to really see the interior, right? Like, it would have never worked. Now, if you go in with anything longer than 30 seconds and you're on any other platform other than maybe TikTok and Insta, again, with a younger audience, you're probably not talking to them. So it's a great example. Welcome back to the Brand Blueprint, and today I am happy to be conducting the second part of a two-part interview. We didn't start off with it as a two-part interview, but it did go there because we have so much information to cover and so many exciting insights that Phil has already delivered. I wanted to give us enough time to really allow him to share all of the key insights that he's brought to the table today. So we are going to start the second part of the interview off, and the focus is on two brands that Phil has been a key part of. And despite his extensive history on development and work with other brands, we're going to focus today on Moon and Bare. And what I want to do is remind our audience about both of these brands, what the inspiration was, and the development process. And so first, let's jump in there, Phil, and start off with just tell our audience a little bit more about both the Moon and Bare brands and how those brands came to exist.
Yeah, definitely, and glad to be back here to record part two here. So our founders, Darnell Smith, Jim Kempland, and Sam Newberry. So Darnell and Jim are 25-year industry vets in the alcohol beverage space. Both have extensive experience, mostly on the advertising and marketing side. And so they kind of know that space just extremely well. And they saw a market need about 5 to 7 years ago in the non-alcoholic alternative space. I think it was just starting to become a thing, 2014, 2016, but there weren't any premium spirits that could be cocktail replacements at the time. And so Darnell, Jim came together with Sam, who is actually a food scientist. So Sam
nice.
Newberry and our team, he spent his extensive career, understands food, chemicals, things like that. A lot of stuff that I wish I knew more about, but I can't too intelligently. So they came together and formed Bare initially. And so Bare started out as a tequila replacement, a bourbon replacement, and a gin replacement. So that was kind of the starting point with the first brand, Bare. And then out of Bare, Darnell Smith, he took the reins with experimenting with adding cannabis and cannabinoids to the beverage. And so over time, probably a 18 to 20 month, development process, he spun out and started Moon, which is essentially Bare, but it has some additions, but primarily it has the cannabis component. So it's 2 milligrams kind of per serving is kind of the recommended dosage. Typically with most players in the space, you like the staple of 3. It's kind of the the guide rails. That's typically the guide rails to sell into retailers and beverage distributors. But yeah, that's the evolution of how both brands kind of bore. And both are kind of operating, wholesale, retail, and D2C right now. So
now, look, I mean, I love that development process, and I'd love to spend a little bit more time there. But I want to cover the full arc of the product and brand development. But I do want to just stop for a quick second because I know people are watching this, especially entrepreneurs who are either interested in innovating in the cannabis space or already, trying to walk down that path. One of the questions I get from entrepreneurs who reach out to me about this space is obviously unique challenges of developing a product in a highly regulated market, right? Like cannabis is not probably the only category, but likely the most popular category of regulated products that are really on fire right now in the US. Talk a little bit about those unique challenges of developing and introducing a cannabis-infused spirit into a highly regulated market like the United States, and like what that meant for you and the founders as you worked with them to really overcome those obstacles.
Yeah, definitely. So, I can't speak to all of the regulations, but a couple that are top of mind that are probably the most relevant are so Moon started out as you mentioned, a cannabis infused. And for audience that may not be as familiar, cannabis is kind of the parent of a bunch of different iterations of cannabis. And so THC is an iteration, hemp is another iteration of the cannabinoid family. And so initially when Moon launched, Moon was only able to operate in California just because of the current regulations of being able to sell and distribute. I believe there were other states where we could have sold wholesale cannabis-infused beverages, but with the team staffing and resourcing, we just didn't have
makes sense.
The capacity. So fast forward though to, I want to say it was March of 2023. There was a bill called the Farm Bill, which allowed hemp-infused THC beverages to be sold direct to consumer across the majority of the United States. So that was actually the trigger for the Moon team to bring me in, because they wanted somebody to figure out a strategy on how to sell direct to consumer nationwide. But because of that farm bill being enacted, that allowed us to be able to spread our wings, so to speak.
Yeah. That dropped the level of regulation, right? Essentially opening up the door for actual retail sales and direct to consumer sales.
Definitely. But on the just one other piece on the retail side, there's like state by state, there's different regulations in terms of the number of milligrams of THC that you can have like per beverage container. So that adds a complete whole other complexity when you're trying to sell to different states, because we originally had our bottles designed one way with a certain amount of THC, but our larger bottles can't be carried in some states. And so that's why we're pivoting to creating more seltzer ready to drink versions that have lower overall quantities of the THC. So
very cool insight. And real quick on that insight, Phil, because I think that's a really important insight, both for founders developing products and jumping ahead and trying to develop packaging right before they actually figure out what the distribution model is and what the geography will look like from the distribution. But as you guys like opened up this distribution, you quickly realized like, man, there's a lot of different laws, different states. So you clearly went with a strategy of deciding kind of the most commonly accepted size and trying to get to the most commonly or maybe commonly distributed package. How did that affect your overall budget regarding product marketing and ultimately distribution, right? Because every state that you go into, if you did decide to do different, to meet those packaging requirements, I'm assuming you would have probably have 5, 6, 7 different package versions of the same product.
Yeah, where it kind of impacts budget is, because the big complexity that we're having to deal with right now is we're selling to end retailers, so dispensaries, but now we're getting into selling into beverage distributors. And I know you're real familiar with this, but for the audience, these are players that you sell them bottles in bulk, and then they go out and then they sell directly to retailers. There's 2 or 3 markups and whatnot. I think from a budgeting perspective, what the impacts are when we have a pending large order with one of these big beverage distributors, it reduces the volume of inventory available for direct to consumer distribution. And so thus, sometimes we have to scale back our advertising or marketing or email marketing efforts. And we have to be conscientious of, what products we're pushing, because we want to make sure the beverage distributors, because, those orders are 10, 20 times the size of a regular direct to consumer order. We want to make sure those guys are happy first. And so that's where some of the downstream impacts to the budget, occur.
Yeah. No, and I love that, because to your point, you guys are making a conscious decision to make sure you have inventory available for your top customer target. Right. Sounds easy, sounds logical. Not every brand does that, right? Sometimes we chase the rainbow in a way that's not sustainable for the business, right? And Instagram likes and TikTok activity can sometimes drive a brand's attention to the kind of nice shiny objects and the things that feel fun. But to your point, if you got a wholesale customer who's buying in bulk and is willing to buy cases upon cases or gallons upon gallons of product at a time, it is a very smart strategy to focus on making sure you have your biggest buyer inventory there and ready for them to go. So smart.
Yeah, and if you think about it too, the other reason why we prioritize them is that the hope is that there's going to be a downstream effect on end consumers, and that they're gonna in a way be influencers for the direct to consumer business.
I love that.
It's just and I'm sure with beverage organizations that are more mature, they have a better feel for what these sales cycles are. But because we're 2 years old running in this dynamic, like we're still trying to figure it out, and we're in growth mode too. So we're not going to have it figured out for at least 3-4 years. So
I know, I love that. Now tell me, this distribution model clearly drives a lot of brand strategy, and the team brought you on specifically to try to figure out, right, how to go to market specifically with Moon. and its kind of restrictions around CBD and THC regulations. So talk a little bit about how you have kind of approached the balancing of your direct to consumer strategy and your wholesale strategy. I know you've talked about a little bit of the difference in packaging, but what are some of the other differences strategically that you had to think through and decide on to really establish what that D2C versus business to business strategy was going to be?
Yeah, well, at a high level, with Moon, a couple of our major brand pillars are, obviously I'm biased, but we believe we're the premium zero proof THC infused spirit in the market. So with any of our materials, whether it's wholesale or DTC, we pay really great attention to imagery, design, our logos, making sure everything's consistent. We try to, speak about it as a premium play within the space. So that's carried out between wholesale and DTC. I think, some of the benefits you have with DTC and e-commerce is that, in the digital space, you can, when people go to your site, you can see what products they're looking at. You can see what content they're observing. You start to get an understanding of their order cadence and frequency. So I think, one of the big differences is in the DTC space, you can be a lot more personalized with the messaging and content that you're pushing to people. And I'll just give one example. We just launched a subscribe and save program for our e-commerce site.
Yep.
And so people have the option to order, to receive orders every 2 weeks, month, bi-monthly, or quarterly.
Oh, wow. And is that direct through you guys or through Amazon? How are you facilitating that subscription?
Yeah, it's direct from us.
Okay, nice.
Amazon still puts the clamps on selling any cannabis or THC related products. So that's the hope in the future. But
that's good to note, though. I mean, again, valuable information because people don't need to spin their wheels going to Amazon to think you're going to retail there. They're not ready yet, and you heard that today from Phil.
Yep. But it was interesting because with the development of that subscribe and save program, because we had the data of some of our best customers, we actually engaged with some of them to get feedback into like how the program should be structured. So the biggest thing was frequency, like what frequency levels should we set as options? And we actually engaged with some of our best customers to help frame up the way that we wanted to set up the program. So I've spent a lot more time in DTC. I'm a big fan. I just love all this data that you have to create like custom experiences. But on the wholesale side, I think we're in the early stages, but we're starting to develop different scripts of how we talk about Moon to dispensaries versus maybe specialty beverage shops versus other types of locations. And then state by state, there's also different ways that we approach people. So, those are some of the nuances between the two.
I love that. I mean, I think our challenge as a show sometimes is to provide insights to our audience that are both actionable and turnkey. And this is definitely what you're doing today. And I want to continue that theme because you mentioned something in terms of your expertise that I wanted to double click on and go a little deeper for our audience. And that is your e-commerce expertise and your passion for solving those challenges via e-commerce. And so one of the things we talked about in pre-production and planning for this episode is the power of understanding the e-commerce P&L. And I know that is a strong expertise of yours, and it directly connects to what we're talking about, which is understanding which channel is the best channel strategy for you. And then understanding once you decide that e-commerce, which for the most part, there's very few brands out here that don't need a strong e-commerce component. So understanding how to manage your e-commerce P&L and exactly what the key components of the P&L are super important for every founder, I think, in the brand game. So let's talk a little bit about the e-commerce and your perspective on that. And first, I want to just start with kind of the broad question, because I think some people would say, well, the e-commerce P&L and profit and loss data, what are you talking about? You guys are just using fancy words and trying to say, make the show sound important. Not really sure what you're saying. So let's be specific. I mean, the core components, what are the core components of the e-commerce P&L that founders need to be aware of and understand?
Yeah, I mean, at a real basic level, so you have gross sales, also called top line revenue. So
Mhm.
what is, the sum of all of your product sales, shipping fees you're collecting, any other service charges that you're collecting? Like that's the starting point. That's the P, I would so to speak. But then in terms of the cost component, there's so shipping fees, there's discounts, there's cost of goods sold,
Yep.
and that can be a variety. How much does it make to with Moon? Bottling and the development of the product. Per SKU. And then the big one that every one of those cost components you can control and develop strategies around. But the biggest one is your marketing and media cost.
Mhm.
And that's the biggest one that a lot of brands try to back into to maximize the most amount of spend but still stay profitable. And then the hope is over time you don't have to pay as much to bring people to your site to generate sales, so
Yep.
that you just have organic traffic and
Traffic.
visitors
Yep.
and return customers that can fund your business. That's the ultimate goal.
Now, Phil, what is where does your point of view on the right way to strike a balance between growth and profitability? Because I know, right, you get all of these popular, pieces of advice out there on the internet. Hey, if you really want to grow your brand, you got to throw money into paid advertising. You should be spending no less than $5,000 a month, targeting $10,000 ideally, upwards of 20 if you can, depending on the size of your brand. Like, you hear so much noise out there. But just in general, without talking specific numbers, how do you strike the right balance between investing in growth and maintaining some profitability and being able to pay some bills? Warning, the following information is important. You may want to pay attention.
Yeah, well, I think what's interesting is there's definitely been a shift in the market over the past 3 to 4 years. If you would have asked me this 5 years ago, I would have said, ballpark first 2 years, just focus on growth. Just
Mhm.
get your brand awareness, get your name out there, collect users. There was a super interesting documentary about MoviePass.
Mhm.
Stacy Spikes, he's a real interesting. He has a book out called Black Founder. Long story short, he got pushed out of MoviePass because they were growing too fast. They reduced their pricing to grow,
Yeah.
but they were never profitable. And
Yep.
so the company went bankrupt after he was pushed out, but he took it back over and they're in a much better spot.
Wow.
But I just bring up that story to say now, whether a company's trying to acquire investment or go public, profitability is a lot more important now than it was 5 years ago. But having said that, in the early stages, you do need to focus on growth. But I want to call it more brand awareness.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
you have to be, and I get into this discussion with founders a lot, is you got to be willing to invest in some efforts to get your name out there where you're not going to see an immediate return. Because if you just think about the world these days in any category, you have tons of competitors, there's tons of content you have to compete with, and you have to figure out ways, how do you cut through the clutter to get people to recognize you, develop a relationship with you, and want to research you and check you out. So I think, there's no magic number in terms of how long you focus on brand awareness versus profitability, but I think you have to strike a much better balance earlier rather than later these days. So.
Yeah, no, I think you make a great point. I remember the Movie Pass. I'll definitely have to check out that documentary, but I remember distinctly the weekly, if not daily, news stories that were coming out at the time that Movie Pass was operating about how much money they were losing, right? And that's not the brand awareness that you want when you're trying to grow your brand awareness. Is, hey, I know Movie Pass, but I only know of them because the news and media talks so much about how much money they're investing in this concept that doesn't seem to be working, right? And the funny thing is, as I've watched that media and tracked it for months and months and months, I never bought a Movie Pass, right? Like, it never compelled me to actually double click in and go, hey, actually, this might be something I'm interested in. And I'm a big fan of movies and watching that content. So I found that, intriguing, that, to your point, you've heard people say sometimes, all news is good news, right? And I'm not necessarily a believer in that concept, because some news, right, while it can be beneficial from a awareness standpoint, it can drive the wrong level of awareness that you're looking for. And that then people start to avoid you, so to speak, versus come to you because of what they perceive is potentially a problem or a challenge with your company. So I love that analysis. Now, tell me this, because I think one of the things that people get so caught up on when they are thinking about the e-commerce P&L is that bottom line profitability number.
Mhm.
And am I making any money? Am I making enough money to cover my operations? Do I have money to invest back into advertising, etc.? But without getting so focused on just bottom line profitability, what are some other critical KPIs that you think a founder should be tracking and looking at regularly to ensure success
Yeah.
in terms of their e-commerce?
Yeah. So, another big one that has become a little more mainstream now, but it was 10 years ago, people weren't really talking about it. But another key metric is understanding your customer's lifetime value. So
Hmm.
a lot of times you look at the company-wide P&L just to make sure you're profitable. But if you want to try to project out like how sustainable your business is going to be, you want to understand. So lifetime value is the total dollar value that a customer has spent with your brand. And a big thing that brands and investors look at now is the ratio of that to your customer acquisition cost.
Wow, that was a really important point. Can we hear that again?
So lifetime value is the total dollar value that a customer has spent with your brand. And a big thing that brands and investors look at now is the ratio of that to your customer acquisition cost. In these days, it's really hard to acquire customers, but I think it can be justified if you're going to have a 3 or 4 multiple of the lifetime value compared to the customer acquisition cost. Like usually the magic number is 3 lifetime value compared to customer
Acquisition.
But
And putting that like in clarity, I think, because this is a really good point. And I think I've heard so many different acronyms of customer acquisition cost, right? But end of the day, our audience, you need to understand it's the money you're spending to drive traffic to your website. It's the money you're spending to drive clicks to a purchase of your product. And so to Phil's point, common industry standards are you should be seeing 3x the return on that spend. Right. So if you are spending $5 on a customer acquisition strategy, you would ideally like to see somewhere in the range of $15 of lifetime value from that customer, meaning that's at minimum the dollars that they've spent back on your brand. Right. It's a perfect ROI measure because it makes so much sense, especially to real founders. I give you $5, you give me $15 back. Man, I'll take that deal every time.
Yep. Because that, to what you mentioned earlier, the higher that number, the more that's going to feed into not just profitability, but money to grow your team, investment, product development, new brand campaigns. So that's becoming more. And actually, it's funny. I actually have some friends that have started businesses to help companies refine and improve that metric specifically. So like it's interesting that's a lot more of what companies are paying attention to now, after you've gone through that initial growth period. So
yeah. Now, just in terms of advice for our founders and for people watching, are there any tools you found particularly effective in helping simplify the process of both managing an e-commerce P&L and also tracking the financial analysis, et cetera? Any tools that you would recommend or that you use and really like?
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned this because one of my to-dos with a venture I'm exploring is putting together like a best practices marketing tax deck for this. But some of my favorite tools. So Shopify is kind of a mainstay for e-commerce platform. Klaviyo is great for email marketing. Most people are spending with Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. And one analytics platform that I've become a huge fan of that I just started using 2 years ago is called DataBox.
Okay.
It has a really clean user interface, and it doesn't really take a lot of development skills to be able to put visuals to show you like all of the P&L components that I mentioned.
Yep.
All you have to do is kind of connect your data from wherever it's coming from, and
Yep.
it kind of validates it all. And then like we actually have executive dashboards to show sales, cost, marketing spend, customer acquisition, lifetime value. And then we have like media channel specific views. We have a website view. We have CRM view. So it's a big tool. Domo, Tableau, Looker, those are other really popular analytics tools. But yeah, there's a lot of great stuff out there. But I just want to give a shout out to DataBox because I'm using it with 4 brands right now. So
oh yeah, that's definitely another tool we will definitely be checking out. And the cool thing is on this show, we actually in the post show notes for those of you watching or listening, we list and link you to many of the services and apps and brands that either our founders drop as part of the episode or that we share as part of the conversation. So make sure you check the show notes for this episode with Phil. So you can find links to all of the important and useful apps that he's sharing during this episode. So let's keep going. I want to make sure we use our time wisely this time, especially given the fact that we're on our second interview with Phil Irvine. And so what I want to do is shift back a little bit to your approach on both Moon and Bear and talk a little bit about the challenges of marketing and positioning that brand in an industry that is still evolving in terms of consumer perception and legality, right? And just broadly speaking, being blunt, in some circles, weed isn't cool, right? In some circles, cannabis is not cool. In some circles, it's very cool. And as the consumer perception continues to migrate, I also am noticing that the legality from a state to state standpoint continues to also migrate, right? And so regulations opening up, consumers' perceptions opening up. How do you position and market a brand with that kind of mix?
Yeah, well, part of the benefit is there is a demand that's been growing over the last 3-4 years, and it's definitely a little more heavier weighted towards I want to say millennials. I think Gen Z is the group after them, but that I'll call it 20 to 34, 35 group. There's definitely a consumer shift toward wanting alternatives to alcohol. And at the same time, there's also a bigger desire and tolerance for stuff like mushrooms, tea, and hemp. I think, we do definitely still face that hurdle where a lot of people are uneasy about transitioning into this category. I think so. A couple of things that we do is as opposed to a lot of our competitors, we lean into the cocktail experience. So we try to align our brands with like the making of cocktails, the enjoyment of cocktails, and the steady, we call it a glow, as opposed to a buzz that you get from alcohol. We call it a glow. And we try to position it as being manageable. Like it's not going to be a huge swing in your psyche. We try to.
You're not going to get like totally tore down slizzard drunk off of this product, right? Like I love that concept. Like you're not going to be passed out in the corner of the bar by just simply like, getting that, I love that moon glow.
Yep. And then we have, simple thing too. We have a dosage guide on our bottles and in some of our packaging to say, if you want an easy glow, 1 ounce, if you want a medium, 2 ounces, and then more. So but I will say, we still do face the challenge because a lot of people just don't read instructions, and so they experiment and then don't have the greatest experience. So there's definitely opportunity for us to communicate that more. But these new seltzer versions that we're going to be launching next year, it's, because when you drink a can, it's pretty, it's just regulated how much THC is in there. So it's going to be a lot easier to control the experience there. So that's something we're really excited about. So.
No, thank you for that answer, Phil, because demystifying kind of how founders in these spaces think about communicating dosage and communicating usage, right? Like one could argue, oh man, they're making a product that has a drug in it that potentially could be addictive or that could drive people to use it more. So I'm weary of, the brand actually telling me to use more than I need, right? Or to use it more often than I need. And I think you make a great point. As a brand, you want the consumer to enjoy the product, not necessarily. It's not about just selling product. It's about enjoying the product. And so given that, your category clearly requires a lot of education, right? You've got to educate, especially people who are new to not just cannabis potentially, but new to cannabis and beverages. Some people may be new to the type of cannabis that is being consumed here, right? Maybe I'm a medical user, maybe I'm a recreational user, but I'm in a state where it's not legal, so I don't really know the dosages and the level of cannabis of the stuff that I'm currently consuming, which I would suspect is probably half the or more of the consuming public in the cannabis space. Is people are out there consuming a lot of these products, and frankly, for years have never had access to ingredients or percent THC in that product, right? So I find this category revolution and evolution to actually be pretty exciting as a consumer, because it allows me now to be more informed about the products that I'm actually putting in my body. So talk to me a little bit about the education piece. Like, how do you balance, too much versus too little? Where do you put it?
Yeah, it is kind of a tricky thing, because when I first joined the brand, where I wanted to go was to talk more about the functional benefits and medical benefits. Because we're not FDA approved, and because there hasn't been concrete research studies, we can't really lean into a lot of that. But we have this thing called EduSips, where we do have it's an email series, and we did run some paid ads for a minute, but we do some comparisons. Moon compared to alcohol, Moon compared to edibles.
Oh, nice.
Moon compared to traditional cannabis, and we talk about like what some of the benefits are of this beverage cocktail experience as opposed to other avenues. And so that's a big way that we try to bring.
And where's that content, Phil? Where's that content located?
Yeah, we have an email series now, so it's part of our. If you sign up for our list or you make a purchase, it's part of our email flows. We probably just having this conversation, we probably need to amplify that more. But
we're amplifying it right here for the members in the show guests. Make sure you go out to the Moon website and sign up for that email newsletter. I think this is a perfect example, to your point, of education from a consumer standpoint, but in a turnkey and actionable way. So I would definitely encourage my audience, especially those of you who are interested in trying this product. I'm definitely interested in trying the product. I will be an early adopter, at least I hope I will be. And then in that sense, I think one of the things that I've always been a big fan of is reading more information. And I don't know about you, but ever since I've been a kid, I was the guy that was sitting at the kitchen table reading the back of the cereal box, right? Like I'd read the back of the cereal box while I ate the cereal just to learn more about it. Now, there was a bunch of games and mindless stuff on the back of the box, but I was more interested in the ingredients and what was in the box versus what was on the box. And so I can definitely see how your approach, Phil, is going to help consumers who are considering products like Bare and Moon to really get into those products from an educational standpoint without feeling like turned off by too much of it.
Definitely. We have our website, enjoymoon.com. But we're going to be doing a series of podcasts. And then 2025, we have some ideas up our sleeves right now to really amplify what we're doing. But
I love that.
Again, I'm biased, but for those that enjoy cocktails, it's a great alternative. And timing wise, hopefully, with some of your audience, Dry January is coming in a month and a half or so. And it's, for myself, the last 3 years I've done Dry January, so no alcohol for a month. And Moon has been a great substitute, if you're craving that fix or whatnot. So yeah,
I love it. Look, the funny thing is, every year, not every year, maybe many years, I've gone into the New Year's, kind of routine, thinking about what my resolution was going to be for the following year. And I've always had like Dry January on that list. I somehow never seem to be able to make it there, right? Part of the problem with me is I think I am such a lover of trying new brands out, trying new products out, that there aren't many times in the year that I find myself, frankly, in a place where I feel comfortable enough to just say, hey, I'm going to go with status quo for the next 30 days. I'm not going to try anything new. I'm not going to go to new restaurants. I'm not going to go out to new experiences. And that's the only way I probably could stay true to, to a dry January. That being said, though, I encourage my listeners to go out and check out Moon and Bare for those of you who are way more disciplined than me, or who currently live a non-alcoholic lifestyle, but would love to have a new beverage like this in the mix. I think this is definitely a brand you should try out. Now, before we wrap up, I wanted to just kind of go back to one key point in your brand story that I really think is important for founders and people considering getting into the brand game to understand and know. And that is the ability to start in one place and end up with a brand in a completely different place. And I love the fact that your founders started with Bare, and we're looking forward to getting the founders on the show, audience. So keeping a lookout for both the episodes coming up on the founding of Moon and Bare. But in that spirit of the story Phil's already shared with us, they evolved. They started in one place with a product and a product concept, and then took that base product, evolved it into a new product while still maintaining the first product, right? And I think that's an important story for founders to understand. You're not going to always end up where you start. Your business idea or brand is not going to stay perfectly identical to what you initially envisioned it, and nor should it. Should it. And so, Phil, talk to our audience about that. I don't want to be the only evangelist always preaching that point. Tell the audience why it's important to leave that flexibility there.
Yeah, I mean, a bunch of factors into why you should be open to change and evolution. I mean, the biggest one that comes to my mind is a perception about a market opportunity one day is not necessarily going to be the reality, another day, 2-3 years down the road.
Whoa, we need to hear that one more time.
The biggest one that comes to my mind is a perception about a market opportunity one day is not necessarily going to be the reality, another day, 2-3 years down the road. With Moon specifically, I mean, we definitely haven't tapped into the entire market with our core. So our core product are 750 milliliter spirit bottles. They're priced at $80. There's only going to be so much of a market for that price point, and given its THC and whatnot. And so one evolution that we're making right now is the development of these ready to drink. We call them RTD seltzer versions of Moon, just because there's a whole separate market of people that they're looking for that product format, lower price point. But then, like I mentioned before, it's kind of known what the dosage level is for every can you're drinking. So it takes the guesswork about the measurements and stuff. So I think that was something that, Darnell probably had it on his roadmap from the early stages, but that was definitely, one evolution. Another evolution, we talked about Amazon earlier, but with what some of our competitors are doing is they're making non-THC versions of beverages that can be sold on Amazon. So it gives you a presence to, that huge audience. And the hope is that you can, cross-sell them into your core product. So I think it's just one example, but I know a lot of my focus there was on products, but, pricing may have to evolve. Subscription, like we just launched a subscribe to save program, but I'm sure that's going to evolve over time. Our messaging, I think we're still trying to figure out who our core audience is. So the way that we talk to end consumers, maybe it is the functional benefits, like maybe that's something that we can lean into. So anyways, I think it's a common, I'll call it a challenge that founders have for sure. So. Yeah.
No, I love that. I mean, and you're right. It is a challenge that founders have. It's a challenge that I work with clients on every day. But I love the fact that you started in a place where you had one clear vision, one product, and man, you messed around and came out with two, right? Like it's like a buy one, get one, right? In the innovation space, which is always a good thing. So look, Phil, you've shared a lot with us across both episodes, and from your journey, from the beginning of your career to joining the Moon and Bare teams, to your incredible depth of knowledge on the e-commerce P&L. But before I leave, I always like to ask founders, what one piece of advice would you give to our founders that you wish you would have had at the beginning of your journey?
Yeah. Good question. I think, and this is probably just a personal, the way that I operate. I focus a lot on short, quick wins and getting things. I take the approach of trying to get like everything done as fast as possible, just to get learnings as fast as possible. But I think having a better understanding of the competitive space and what they've tried and learned from to make your process more efficient is something I would have told myself. I know, some founders that probably come from consulting backgrounds, it's just a natural part of the framework and thought process. But that's something that I think I would have paid more attention to out the gate. So.
No, excellent advice. I so appreciate that. Now, before we go, can you share where our audience can connect with you, learn more about Moon, more about Bare, more about what the all the great things you're out there doing?
Yeah. So the best for me, LinkedIn. So Phil Irvine. I believe I'm one of 2 or 3, so it's pretty easy to find me there. And then so Moon. So enjoy Moon. So enjoy MXXN.com. But follow us on our socials. Enjoy Moon, Instagram, TikTok, and then Bare is enjoy Bare BARE.com for Bare. So.
Thank you for sharing those socials. And remember, crowd, we are big believers in LinkedIn. I love Phil's introduction. You won't find more than at least 3, probably less than 3. And I'm pretty confident you won't find only one good-looking, bald, black Phil Irvine on LinkedIn. So just take that cue. If you're watching on video, you know who to look for. But if you're listening, trust my description. Good-looking black guy. Look for him on LinkedIn, Phil Irvine. Phil, man, thank you again. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show, not once, but twice. I'm hoping to get you back maybe a 3rd time. I'm looking forward to getting your founder on the show and us going even deeper on the origin story behind Bare and the evolution into Moon. But until then, man, it has been great having you. Your expertise and insights are invaluable. And I know our listeners took a lot away from today's conversation. So thanks again for joining our show and sharing your journey with us. And I look forward, man, to seeing this brand, both of these brands blow up. And like I said, I'm looking to be an early adapter, definitely looking to get some product out here in Charlotte as soon as possible so I can try it with my friends and family.
Definitely. No, thank you for the opportunity. And I think we have some other topics in the pipeline. So maybe I'll be back here. So.
All right. You heard it here first. Thanks again for tuning in to the Brand Blueprint. Once again, a great episode. Go out and check out all of our content, and additional bonus content will be available on our website at thebrandblueprint.biz. As always, you can find us on all of your favorite platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Amazon, and YouTube. And we drop episodes twice a week. So check us out. This Phil Irvine episode will be coming to a platform near you really soon, likely to drop actually in mid to late December. So we're looking forward to releasing this episode to the rest of our audience. Thanks again, man, and have a great day.
All right, you too. Appreciate it.
Thanks for joining us on the Brand Blueprint journey. Make sure to follow us on all of our social media platforms to stay updated. Watch the full episodes on our YouTube channel for an in-depth experience. Don't forget to subscribe to our website at thebrandblueprint.biz for exclusive content and materials. We're everywhere you need us to be.